your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Hawkeye Nation, to another episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, your daily podcast covering your Iowa Hawkeyes on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Wright Hillpiper. With me today, my co-host, LeShun Daniels. And before we get into anything today, I want to thank you all for making the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast your very first listen every single day. You can find the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast for free wherever you get your podcasts at, and also on YouTube by searching Locked On Hawkeyes. Now, like I said, I've got LeShun Daniels, former Iowa running back, with me on the podcast today. Got one very specific topic to cover today. As you know, when me and LeShun are both on the podcast, we tend to get a little carried away and spend 45 to 50 minutes talking to each other about whatever the topic is for that day. So we'll try to keep it a little bit shorter for you guys. No story of the day today or anything like that. Just one very specific topic, and that is the best and worst case scenario for the Iowa Hawkeyes football team this upcoming season. Now, I found an article yesterday written on 24/7 Sports. I can't remember the name of the guy that wrote the article, but he went through and did the best and worst case scenarios for each Big Ten football team for this upcoming season. So we'll start out, of course, with the best case scenario. He had Iowa best case scenario going 10-2. Overall, and 7-2 in the conference. Has losses to Michigan and Ohio State, wins over Minnesota and Wisconsin, arguably are the most important of the season. If Iowa drops these games against Minnesota and Wisconsin, they're putting their chances of, going back to a Big Ten championship in a little bit of jeopardy, as well as he talked about, if Iowa ends up losing to Iowa State early in the season in week 2, that could, kind of make Iowa's chances to go back to back sort of touch and go. So LeShun, I want to get your thoughts on, that sort of that 10-2 prediction and what you think about that.
Yeah, for sure. So for starters, at this point in time in the off season, everyone's just trying to find something to talk about, right? Whether it's us, other people in the media. You're just trying to find something to talk about, just try to generate some hype, because obviously football season is so far away. We still got 4 months until the start of the season. So we're just trying to fill air, right, and talk about things. Predictions, they don't really matter in the grand scheme of things, really at all. Obviously it's nice. It's definitely nice to have people think highly of your team before going into the season, right? You'd rather have them think highly of you than not. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter because, again, it's going to be a new team that's going to roll out there this year, right? It's not the same team as 2021, not the same team as 2020, right? And so on and so forth, right? You're going to have new people in different spots. You got new players coming in. You're going to have guys that have gotten better at football and guys that have made the jump, as well as several other teams, right, who are going to have players coming in that are going to be looking to obviously make the jump and make that next hump over different things, right? So obviously to have a prediction of 10-2 is an okay start, right? Preferably you want it to be undefeated, right? But obviously you know that every single year, and especially playing in the Big Ten, you're going to have a challenging schedule, no matter what everyone may think of it, even if you may avoid Ohio State or Michigan, regardless, it's going to be a tough schedule, because playing in the Big Ten, playing in any conference in college football and Division I football is going to be very difficult to go out there and pull out victories. But there's going to be a lot of different things that are going to play a part of Iowa being successful. That Iowa typically is going to have a really good defense and spectacular special teams, but it's all going to be falling back on the shoulders of the offense, right? Is the offense going to be able to produce in a way that's going to help keep the defense off the field and provide enough points to obviously win football games? So a lot of questions, a lot of things that are going on in this offseason that people want to know and have answers to. Unfortunately, we got to wait until till September. So.
Absolutely. And I love your point of view on that as well, because you're one of the few people that I know that is like predictions, like preseason predictions don't matter all that much. And I wish more people understood that too, because yeah, like you said, it's nice to have, experts and analysts or whatever you want to call them out there talking highly of your team. Like all this team's, definitely going to go undefeated or they're only going to lose 1 or 2 games. But in the grand scheme of things, you're absolutely right. Preseason ratings or predictions, I guess, aren't as big as they seem to be. Granted, so it's tough to kind of overlook that thing and sort of go more in depth to what the team looks like, go into the depth chart and look at what they're, because nobody has the time to go through and look at every single team on a team's schedule and be like, well, this is the player that's going to give us trouble. Like that's the coaches and the players' jobs. You know what I mean? Like it's not the fans' jobs to go through the rosters and game film and all that sort of thing to kind of predict what's going to happen. So it's not something that gets done very often, which is unfortunate. But granted, people want to hear about it. They want to hear about the predictions, and I obviously I like to hear about them too, regardless of whether they mean anything or not. It's definitely nice to hear that. There are some analysts out there that are like, yeah, this Iowa team's going to come back and they're going to be just as good, if not better, than they were last year, which is, obviously great, but it's hard. And like you said, I mean, everybody's looking for stuff to talk about. There's no major sports that's in season right now. Like you get for Iowa right now, for men's at least, it's track. Their track team is probably, better than their baseball team is right now. Their baseball, granted, third in the Big Ten, but still. So Iowa doesn't have like a major sport that's in season right now, so it's hard to find things to cover. And I'm sure everybody out there listening that has also listened to any of my other episodes can tell you about that personally. It's hard to find very interesting stuff to cover. But obviously recruits help with that, commits help with that. Different, random different things going on within programs and schools and stuff like that helps a lot. But like you said, it's hard to find stuff like this nowadays. So we have to rely on predictions and stuff like that, and see what everybody else is talking about. See what is getting everybody else fired up or not fired up about the upcoming season. And according to this guy from 24/7, he's not concerned when it comes to the best case scenario of any of these other games. And me and you have talked extensively on the podcast before about, Iowa's schedule and, how like score predictions, what our thoughts on the record was going to be. And that's where I had Iowa at too, was 10-2, losing to Michigan and Ohio State. But obviously it's hard to say that, when you're not for sure. So one of the questions that I had for you, I had a list of questions for you today, was, do you think that Iowa has a legitimate shot to go in and, beat a team like Ohio State or beat a team like Michigan? Because obviously we know that going into those games, Iowa is not going to be the betting favorite. So what do you think, LeShun? How do you think these games are going to play out?
Yeah, so it's definitely tough to say, but I definitely do believe Iowa's obviously going to have a really good shot. For mainly because they got a lot of guys coming back on both the offense side of the football and defensive side of the football. So you're going to have a lot of experience. You're going to have a lot of guys that have played a lot of football and that have played in a lot of high stakes football games, right? And that are going to be anxious and ready for the opportunities, when they present themselves. Because again, it's not very often, especially being on the west side of the Big Ten. It's not very often that you play an Ohio State and a Michigan, let alone play them both in the same season. So those are definitely going to be games that your players are going to want to be jacked up and ready for, because not only does it feel good whenever you have a chance to play those teams and you have to get a chance and you beat those teams, for the guys that want to play at the next level, obviously there's going to be plenty of scouts and eyeballs on that football game, right? Because they want to scope out the kind of talent that is going to be available. So it's just going to be a great opportunity. But, knowing Iowa and the history, really since Coach Ferentz has been there, right? They usually always play the Blue Bloods of the Big Ten, extremely, extremely tough. And obviously Ohio State and Michigan are no exception to that. It's very rare that you get an outcome that was like in the Big Ten title game, right? And I'm sure that's been constantly in the back of their mind, especially, as we're trying to find things to talk about, right? Even the players got to find, things that kind of motivate them to want to keep going hard in the offseason, right? And obviously, Iowa has a good culture, fantastic culture, that, the guys are going to come in, they're going to work hard. But, definitely having the extra motivation of, when you think about the last time that you were out there playing a Big Ten football game, right, and really being embarrassed on national television and, losing in a tough way in a bowl game, right? Like those aren't fun, aren't the funnest memories, right, to
Yeah,
have.
exactly.
So, there's definitely going to be things that kind of continue to motivate those guys moving forward. But again, I mean, we got so long until those games, and then the start of the season. So, but just knowing Iowa and knowing the way that we play our brand of football, it's definitely going to come down to doing the things that Iowa does best, and right, and forcing other teams to play Iowa football versus the other way around. And that's usually how we have a bunch of success playing teams like Michigan and Ohio State.
Absolutely. And I mean, to what you said, I think that Iowa has a real shot to beat both of these teams. Granted, I think that Ohio State is going to be more of a challenge than Michigan is, just based off of their recent history as a college football playoff team. But neither of the games are going to be any easier than the other by any circumstances. I'm not saying that, oh, well, if we beat Ohio State, there's zero shot we lose to Michigan, or, the other way around, whatever it is. But it's two games that, and like I said during when we talked about score predictions and our record predictions, these are the two games that scare me a lot for this season. And every team is going to lose a football game at some point. I mean, if Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, talk about whatever football team you want, all of them have lost games before. And these are the two games that I think that might get the better of the Hawkeyes this season. But that's not to say that they don't have a shot as well. So to what LeShun said, yeah, there's a shot that Iowa can beat both of these teams. Maybe Iowa will go undefeated this season. Who knows? Maybe Iowa will win 2 games this season. Nobody knows. And that's why these preseason predictions don't hold, as much credit and as much merit as a lot of people think that they do, because every team's going to be different every single year. Like you said, there's guys on this Iowa team that aren't returning. There's guys on Michigan that aren't returning. There's guys on Ohio State that aren't returning. Several of them went to the NFL. So it's all of the teams in the Big Ten have lost combined anyway, have lost quite a few very, very talented players. So it kind of opens up the conference a little bit to a little bit more interpretation for those guys that are going to be coming in to fill those spots. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how these games turn out. And I mean, I wish the best for the Hawkeyes, obviously. But like I said, these are the games that just they send shivers down my spine. I don't want to think about them. I don't want to think about them until the week before. You know what I mean? But win or lose, we'll be back here on the podcast to do, game recaps, win or loss, whether Iowa loses by 42 against Michigan, or if they beat Michigan by 42. We'll be back here on the podcast to talk about all that. And I'm sure that LeShun will be on for a lot of those game recaps, because I mean, there's no better person out there related to Locked On than LeShun to come on and talk about college football game recaps, especially in Division I. There's nobody out there who knows more about it. So, anyways, we've got to get into the worst case scenario at some point. I don't want to talk about it. I'm sure you don't want to talk about it, but it's something that's got to be done. But before we get into that, I do really quick need to talk about Built Bar. Built Bar has these new things called birthday cake puffs. They taste almost exactly like dipping your hand into a tub of that like birthday cake or like funfetti frosting, that you get down at the grocery store. They're also covered in 100% real chocolate, and you can make every day feel like your birthday when you're eating this. And on top of that, they are healthy as well. Within 150 calories, 16 grams of protein, and 9 grams of sugar. It's a limited time flavor, so you got to get your hands on it now. We can't promise it's going to be there tomorrow, so you better go get it today. Once again, all of them are covered in 100% real chocolate. And right now, Built.com has a a deal going on with Locked On. We have a promo code for you guys to use at checkout. That is LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order at checkout. Once again, that is LOCKED15, LOCKED15 to go get 15% off your order at built.com. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, the worst case scenario for the Hawkeyes this season. 24/7 Sports has their worst case scenario at 5-7 overall, 3-6 in the conference, with losses to Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa State. And we talked about it earlier. They're not going to be the betting favorites versus teams like Michigan and Ohio State, but obviously Iowa has one of the toughest schedules in the Big Ten, and that is not something that I will leave up for debate whatsoever. If you go through, you look at the Big Ten, you look at the schedules, Iowa has one of the toughest schedules in there. And like you said, it's not every year that Iowa has to come in and play Michigan and Ohio State in the same season. So Iowa has an extremely, extremely tough road ahead of them, if you would like to say. And 24/7 Sports seems to think that if Iowa does lose to Iowa State, granted it's week 2, keep that in mind. If 24/7 seems to think that if Iowa loses to Iowa State, Iowa's going to be sort of touch and go for the rest of the season when it comes to being able to get to a bowl game or to a Big Ten championship game. And granted, if Iowa doesn't make it to the Big Ten championship game, it's not the end of the world. But if Iowa doesn't make it to a bowl game at all, let alone the Big Ten championship, that's going to be raising some questions from a lot of people, myself included, because I'm going to want to know what went wrong, what's going on. So, what are your thoughts on the whole 5-7 thing? What could make somebody think that a team like Iowa, coming off of a Big Ten championship loss, granted, what would make somebody think that they could possibly go 5-7 at this point?
Yeah. That's definitely a good question, because you look at Iowa and you look at the brand football that we play, right? We play very, very tough defense, we play great special teams, and then we score enough points on offense, right, to win the ball game. And I think that's the part that gives a lot of people pause. It's just the offense really hasn't progressed as much as I know for a fact I would have liked it to, over the years, and I'm sure as much as the coaching staff would have liked it to at this point, right? I mean, it seems like almost every year that the defense, in some way, shape, or form, does bail us out on a number of different occasions. Which is, granted, that's part of team football, right? That's called complementary football. When one part of the ball isn't really doing what they know that they can do, it's part of the other side to pick up that slack, right? But knowing how football is starting to evolve and knowing how strong offenses are getting each year, right? It's tough to see Iowa really not take that jump offensively, right? No matter how good your defense is, right? It can be tough to win that brand of football all the time. And we kind of saw it a little bit last year, right, with Iowa and the games that we lost. It was just a lot of pressure that was put on the defense, right? And the offense really just couldn't hold their part of the bargain. So that I know for a fact is definitely a part that plays a piece into why people might not be as highly on Iowa as they may be other teams, right? Because then you look at a team like last year, like Georgia, right? I mean, obviously they had a really, really good defense, and their offense wasn't spectacular, right? But their offense is able to put up points, right, when need to be to win football games, right? And although Iowa has, I'd like to say that they have consistently, right, a top defense in the country. The offense just really hasn't been able to make that jump, right? And that's something that's I'm going to be looking for the guys to be able to do this season. And I'm sure many of the people listening, and as well as the players in the building, coaching staffs, and the fans around the country are going to be looking for the offense to make that jump, right? And you mentioned that losing a game early in the season can definitely feel like a true gut punch, especially losing to Iowa State, right, being so early in the season. And I know that when we talk about schedules, several weeks back, right, that the best teams are going to make, a big jump, right, from week 1 to week 2, and they're going to continue to improve each week, right? So if you look at a team and, they look kind of okay, week 1, and then they don't improve at all that following week, right, then you're going to start to raise some questions regardless of whether they win the football game or not, right? Because again, you want to see teams make that jump, right? And it felt like there was times last year, like where the defense was consistently making that jump, right? I mean, they had the defense was playing so well that they benched several quarterbacks throughout the year, right? Because their defense was playing so well. But the offense just never really, they never really made that jump, right? And that's going to be, I feel like, really, really the key for the Iowa football team this year, and their success. Just because the teams that they're going against this year, especially the way that they end the season with basically like 3 rivalry games, and then you have, you got a Purdue, you got a Northwestern, you got an Ohio State, right? To finish the season like that is definitely not going to be easy. So you're definitely going to want to see that improvement week to week, especially on the offensive side of football, because I feel like offense is really going to be the driving force on Iowa's success if they take that next jump, right? So who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But I mean, it's been like a decade since Iowa hasn't made a bowl game, and I don't really see that happening this year. So
I am very glad you brought the offense up, because it has raised some questions this offseason throughout spring ball and now going into summer workouts and stuff like that. There have been a lot of questions raised about, Iowa's ability to perform consistently on offense. And now don't take this the wrong way. This is no discredit to you, but Iowa's defense has usually been a little bit, at a higher level than the offense has been in the last few years. Like I said, no disrespect to you at all, as a former player. But that's how it's been the last couple of years coming out of spring ball, especially. Iowa's defense has been a few steps ahead of the offense. But I mean, over the last 2-3 years, Iowa has had a lot of guys come back that have had a lot of experience playing. And now this year playing or going into this season with 3 guys in the linebacker core, that it's projected to be one of the best linebacking cores in the entire country. Obviously the defense is going to be a little bit ahead of the offense at this point. We don't have, a star quarterback or, wide receivers that are going to go number 1 overall or anything like that. But we've got a lot of big names on defense. So it's definitely hard to ignore the questions on offense, and I've tried my best to answer as many as I can here. But I have my doubts about the offense as well. I obviously have less doubts about the defense. I'm very confident in Iowa's defense. But yeah, there's a few eyebrows that were raised, especially during spring ball, about Iowa's offense. Hopefully they can pick that up. Obviously, like you said, there's zero way to tell without seeing games from this coming season. And obviously we're going to have to wait for those. But I'm excited to get into this football season, especially, being able to bring you on the podcast. I'm excited to see how this goes, because I'm probably going to bring up this episode specifically quite a bit. But yeah, there's a lot of questions on offense. And I think that Iowa does have a very good chance of, going this best case 10-2, 7-2 in the conference record, if the offense can, pull their own weight and make sure that they're doing, the jobs that they need to do as well. And maybe they can even improve, maybe go 11-1, 12-0, depending on whether or not Ohio State decides to be good this year. I don't see them being bad. I think their best case scenario was projected to be 12-0. And I think their worst case was maybe like 7 or 8 wins. So it's going to be tough, and I'm excited to see it, all play out. But the offense needs work, and the defense does too. Don't get me wrong. The defense needs work as well. But there's definitely a lot more questions to do with the offense right now, rather than, the defense going into this upcoming season and summer workouts as well. So I'm excited and I'm very nervous to see how this plays out. So I do have a few questions for you as well. Don't think I'm letting you go yet. Before we get into those questions, really quick, I want to talk about BetOnline. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all of your sporting, wagering, and betting sports info. You can find all of the latest odds, news, sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, UFC fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. So head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. Once again, that is betonline.net. It is where the game starts. Now, the questions that I have for you, I could not possibly remember all of them, so I have them written down. And I wanted to mention this earlier. I didn't get to mention this earlier, but Kirk Ferentz, since taking over, I believe his first season of official head coaching was 1999, the 1999 season. He has had 3 seasons in that time period where Iowa has had less than 6 wins, which is a pretty good, pretty good outstanding record to have. Those 3 seasons were his first 2 years where they went 1-10, and what was the other one? 1-10 and 3-9 in 1999 and 2000, and then obviously 2012 where they went 4-8. I will not bring up the 2012 season again on this podcast because it haunts me to this day. I was a very early Iowa fan back in those days, and I refuse to bring up that season. Anyways, I didn't know enough about football back then to know what was going on, but I was very confused as to why Iowa was not good that year. But we won't talk about that. That's not what today's episode is about. So, like I said, a couple of questions that I have for you. Do you think that as of right now, does Iowa deserve to be in the top 25? Like preseason wise, do they deserve to be there?
So if you're basing it off of body of work last season, without a doubt, obviously they deserve to be in the top 25, right? But honestly, like going into the season, honestly, I feel like no one is honestly deserving of being in the top 25 ranking. Really just because, again, no one's played football, right? I mentioned at the beginning of the season, no one's played any real football. No one, again, you have so many different moving pieces in college football. And, really outside of, maybe your top 4 teams, right? You have every year, right? You have Alabama, you got Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson usually most of the time, right? Like outside of like those few, right? There's so many other different teams that find their ways into the top 10 or that were ranked in the preseason that find themselves unranked, right, to finish the season, right? So I feel like there's so many different things going on. So I honestly feel like no one is honestly deserving of it. And I'd much rather just have it be just let their play determine that. And, come November, right, when the college football rankings first come out, right, then now you're like, okay, now where are we at? Like how do we look now? Because that's really when things start to matter, right? It doesn't really matter, right, when you have, early in the season when you have 2 top 5 teams playing against each other, because hey, you might find yourself in a situation just like we did last year, right, when we were playing Penn State, and again, it was a top 5 matchup, and obviously several weeks later, right, Penn State found themselves unranked, right, and we found ourselves outside the top 15, right? So like none of those rankings honestly matter. And if you are basing it off of body of work from last year, yeah, I would most definitely deserve to be in the top 25. But in all honesty, going into every single season, no team deserves to be in the top 25 until games are honestly played.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said just a second ago about how any team can come into the top 25 and be a contender in the preseason. And that got me thinking about Cincinnati and Wake Forest, because I had never heard of Wake Forest before this past season. I knew that Cincinnati was there, but I didn't think that they mattered. And then I mean, I had never heard of Wake Forest before. So yeah, there's, I mean, any given team, any given day, any given year can, outperform somebody else. But like you said, top 25 predictions, they don't matter right now. You can put Alabama at 1 and you could put Alabama at 25 and it's not going to matter. People are going to be upset if you put them that low. But it's those don't matter as of right now. And I wanted to get your take on that because if you base it solely on last year's performance, yeah, I think they deserve to be there. I mean, USA Today has the Hawkeyes ranked as number 11 in their preseason top 25, but CBS Sports has them not ranked at all. So there's too much variation between whatever these websites are, whether it's 24/7 or CBS Sports or USA Today. There's too much variation because everybody's list is going to be different. There's always, like you said, there's always going to be those select few teams that are always going to be up there within top 10, top 5 sort of thing. But there's just too much variation. You can't get a level read on things. And like you said, none of this matters until we see everybody play. Because, Alabama could go back to the early 2000s days where they won 3 and 4 games a year, and Iowa could go undefeated and win a national championship. Who knows? Anything's possible. Anything can happen. So it's tough to say, but I agree with that. If you go based solely off last year's, I think they deserve to be in the top 25, maybe in the top 15. But it's all up to speculation at this point. We won't know for a few more months whether or not Iowa actually deserves to be there or not. So we'll just have to wait on that and see. Where do you think Iowa will finish the season ranked? Do you think they'll be in the top 25? Do you think they'll be out? Do you think they'll be in the top 10? Where are you thinking?
Yeah. Again, it's hard to say, but I will say that I feel like the things that Iowa has been doing, really over the past few years has been very, very good, right? They've found themselves every single year. I mean, usually, right, you're competing, right, for a Big Ten West title, but I feel like, really over the past few years, right, it's really been something that it's like, hey, it's like they've been kind of teeter-tottering, right, between either winning it or just coming in second and just missing it, right? And that if you're most years, if you win the Big Ten West, right, you're going to finish the season ranked, without a doubt. And I feel like the staff has definitely been doing some great things, and I really can't see that changing, right? I mean, we've seen it in recruiting a little bit, and we've seen it on the football field as well. So I don't see them really taking that step back, honestly. Especially knowing the amount of guys that are having to come back this season that have played a lot of football. So, I would obviously anticipate them being able to finish the season ranked, especially if they're continuing on the trajectory that they've been, really over the past 2 years. But again, you never know, right? Football is a dynamic game, and year to year, week to week, and even day to day, things change. So, but I'm definitely hoping that they would finish the season as a top team for sure.
Absolutely. And I do want to apologize. I know that a lot of the questions I'm asking you can't really be, answered until we see them play. And I'm sure everybody listening is saying the exact same thing. So I obviously our opinions about where Iowa is going to finish are fairly similar in some way. But we both agree that there's no way to tell until, people actually play. Now, one thing that I want to say, I only want your opinion on this. Do you think that Iowa will finish better or over than 500? Over 500? Do you think they'll finish over 750? What are you thinking here? Because I don't think that there's a single chance that Iowa's going to finish below 500, right? Yeah. And I don't think there's a good chance that they'll finish below 750. But what do you think?
Yeah, they're definitely not going to finish under 500. If they finish under 500, definitely would not want to be in that building for sure. I mean,
I might have to quit the podcast. If they finish below 500, I might have to quit the podcast.
We went 7-6 in 2014, and it was miserable. It was miserable in the complex. So I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine being under 500. And I mean, Coach Ferentz has done such a great job, right? He's only been under 500 3 times in a 20+ year career at Iowa. So, no, I'm just gonna leave it at that. No, they're not gonna finish under 500. Even though I've been saying we haven't seen them play, but I'm fairly confident they're not gonna finish under 500. 750 again. I feel like they've been on such a great trajectory over the past few years, right? We've seen flashes of real greatness, right, where they could be considered, on a consistent basis as a top 5 team, right? And if you can get that consistent play a little bit more, right, I feel like there's no reason, right, they don't finish over 750 as well. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Absolutely. And you said something to the fact that, like, back in 2014, you guys went 7-6, and that locker room, that sort of facility mentality was a little not great. I can't even imagine what it was like in '99 when they went 1-10. I don't want to imagine what it was like. Granted, it was Ferentz's first year of coaching. He had to take over for Hayden Fry, but I mean, I didn't even like being in the locker room after losing a home football game in high school. You know what I mean? Nobody's talking, everybody's silent. There's no phones out, there's no music playing, there's nothing. Nobody wants to say anything, because the first person that talks, everybody's just gonna unload on them. You know what I mean? So I can't. It gives me chills thinking about what it must have been like after going and 7-6. That's a winning record. That's not terrible. You know what I mean? I can't even imagine. But Iowa has built the tradition of that they're going to be a fairly decent team year after year. So I can imagine it's probably not fun being in those facilities after something like that happens.
No, not at all. Not at all. It did help that we didn't win a single rivalry game that year, so that definitely made it a little bit worse.
Yeah. Well, those seasons happen from time to time. I don't think we'll see it this year. Even with the schedule that Iowa's got, playing those two very, very, big schools, even within the Big Ten. Everybody, I haven't seen one story, one article or anything like that of anybody saying that they have a chance to beat Michigan or Ohio State this year. Everybody's saying, Iowa's going to go 10-2. There's no way they're going to beat them. There's no way they'll go 11-1 or undefeated, whatever it is. But there's also nobody out there saying that they're going to finish less than 10-2. You know what I mean? Other than this worst case scenario thing, and that was done for every team in college, or every team in the Big Ten at least. Nobody's really out there doubting Iowa either. And we talked about it too, and I've talked about it multiple times on the podcast. Right now, the biggest questions have to do with the offense. But the defense is pretty set where they're at. Obviously, there's stuff that needs to be fixed with that as well. As far as special teams goes, my guy Torrey Taylor, he's going to cook it up this year. It's no doubt. Torrey Taylor is an absolute beast, and I need to get him on the podcast really bad. I've wanted to talk to him for so long. Granted, he's only a punter, but you know what? I wanted to be a punter once too. So
superstar punter.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Superstar punter. That guy is something else. I've seen his interviews, and he's an interesting guy for sure. But yeah, I mean, other than the offense, there's not a whole lot of questions circling around how good Iowa is going to be this year, how bad they're going to be, or whatever. So I think that 10-2 is a fair estimate of where they'll finish at. I think that obviously 12-0 is the best case scenario for Iowa this season, and I think everybody should think that. But I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to say about the worst case scenario. I mean, like, Wisconsin's kind of touch and go with Iowa. Iowa's had Minnesota's number for a while now. I think they've won the last 7 meetings against Minnesota. And then there's Michigan, there's Ohio State, and I don't think Iowa's going to lose against Iowa State. Iowa State just lost a starting quarterback, a starting running back, and a starting tight end, all to the NFL. Also, shout out Brock Purdy for going to the Niners. He's my boy. Now, anyways. But I don't see Iowa taking an L against Iowa State, especially this year. If they could beat out, Brock Purdy and Breece Hall last year, I don't think they'll give them any more troubles than they did But that was definitely a fun game to watch last year, and it will be another fun game to watch this year. So, but
Sure.
I think the main mantra of today's episode is that you can't say anything with certainty until you see him play. It's just it's how it is. It's how he's always been. And some people take these preseason predictions, a little bit too seriously. I mean, I still even get a little heated about it. Like, don't come in here saying we're going to lose to Iowa State. Come on now, that's not going to happen. But yeah, like we've said, it's all up to speculation. Nothing's set in stone. We can't tell you anything for certain until the season gets underway and we see how good Iowa is this year. But I think we're running into about the 40-minute range, so I think we'll get out of here. So I want to thank LeShun Daniels for coming on the podcast today. It's always a pleasure to get to sit down, talk Iowa football with him. He knows miles more than I do about this Iowa football team. He's been a part of it before he's played for him, so he's definitely got a little bit more knowledge up there about Iowa football than I do. So it's always great to have him on the podcast, and we'll have him back on here soon as well. LeShun, is there anything that you would like to say?
No, man, it's always a good time, pod talking Hawks, Hawkeye football. So, thank you, and go Hawks as always.
Yes, absolutely. And you guys know every time me and LeShun are both on here, we're going to run 40, 45 minutes. That's just how it is. We only had one topic today. I thought this was going to be a 20-minute episode. But we got to riffing a little bit. It went a little long, but who cares? I'm sure the fans of the podcast enjoy it. So thank you all for tuning in to today's episode. You could follow me and LeShun on Twitter at RyHill and at LeShun Daniels Jr. Twitter, if you're listening, please verify me. LeShun is verified and I'm not, and that's not cool. Please fix that. Anyways, that being said, go follow Locked On Hawkeyes on Twitter as well. That's at Locked On Iowa. Once again, thank you all for tuning in today's episode, and I will see you all tomorrow.